Welcome to Windows IT Pro Insider. This is a special edition that we are having at the Microsoft Enterprise Engineering Center. With me, I have Sean Deuby. With me is Jeff James, Mike Otey, and Paul Thurrott. We have just spent the last intense 2.5 days learning about and this morning test driving Windows Server 8. And so we have lots of thoughts and comments about it, and thought we'd just kind of dive right in.
With me, apparently.
Yeah.
So,
Paul, tell us what you think.
well, first of all, it felt like 2.5 weeks, not 2.5 days. It's interesting. I think that this is probably the biggest server release since Windows 2000 and Active Directory and Telomere and all that. I think that the big conceptual change that I'm seeing this time is this notion of server aggregation, where instead of going from console to console or from PC to PC, you can manage all of the servers in your environment from a single location.
Right, it kind of goes into the cloud management concept, working the cloud in with Windows Server 8.
Yeah, it reminds me of a concept I had, or rather a conversation I had with Mark Rasinovich back in TechEd, which was kind of conceptual at the time, but what he said was that what they had learned from Windows Azure was going to be pulled into Windows Server on-prem, and you can see it now in Windows Server 8. It's very interesting. I think there's some UI issues that need to be resolved with the management consoles. Obviously, it's the first gen on that kind of stuff, and I think we'll see some changes over the course of the beta, but it's still, it's very exciting, and it's so obvious once you see it that this is the way it should be. You wonder how we ever put up with, well, the way things are now, essentially.
You know, that's true. When you think about it, it makes a lot of sense where they're going, because almost every organization has a lot of servers to manage, and they've kind of moved from the idea of managing one server at a time through their tools to managing multiple servers at a time, hence the cloud. So it really does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I was struck just by, as Paul said, it felt like 2.5 weeks. Both the number of changes, and they said that there are 300 plus new features in the OS. And I know we've all heard that before in previous versions of it, all that, but you'd have to have been here to appreciate they carpet bombed us with new significant features, one after another. And while we were still recovering from that one, then they would finish. Jeff Woolsey talked for 2 hours about Hyper-V.
By the way, 2 hours straight. I mean,
2 hours straight, jam-packed.
And it wasn't so much that his talk was notable for that. There were a bunch of things in a row that were like 2 hours straight.
Yeah.
On very particular topics.
And then they would end it up by saying, oh, by the way, that's just the most important stuff. We have a bunch of other things under the covers. And then they demoed almost all of it, too, to show that it really worked. I mean, it's not vaporware.
There are some huge conceptual changes with this release, though. One of them, moving away from the GUI as a preferred management style into a headless mode of operation. That is huge.
Well, they made the server core back and forth. You can make it server core or not.
Right. That is a very important point, because a lot of times, server core has been out, but you didn't want to use server core, because if you did, it was a one-time only shot, and you had to reinstall everything if you wanted to go backwards.
Plus, you had to learn.
Now it's a role. The GUI is a role, and you can add the role, you can pull the role out, so you can move from server core to full to back again, making it much easier. But also, another main concept that we're going with is the idea of managing it with scripts, or with the command line using PowerShell.
Yeah. You guys will remember, I think it was Windows Server 2003, they came up with this phrase, it's a server, not a surfboard. It was when they turned off IE. Right. And today they've really taken that to its logical extreme, which is it's a server, period. You don't sit in front of it, you don't interact with it directly, it's a node in a management console, and you access it remotely. And I think when you sort of hear it that way, it makes sense all of a sudden, right? Like, why are we doing it any other way? Right. And so they're really formalizing that in this release, and I think that's where things are going.
It was interesting, too, to see PowerShell everywhere. I mean, we were joking about it. Every time they said PowerShell, we should have, if it was a drinking game,
we'd be dead.
That's right. We'd be dead. We were playing PowerShell bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo, PowerShell.
Yeah, whenever they mentioned, and it's all managed by PowerShell, we would all go, bingo.
We've had conversations in the past where, around PowerShell, are people really using PowerShell? And how, for many administrators, this is a complex environment. And there are some things coming in this version of PowerShell they have in Windows Server 8 that make it easier to use, certainly. But they are really basing everything on that essentially command line text-based interface first, and then building GUIs on top of it.
They really are, and that really emphasizes the need for administrators to learn PowerShell, learn how to use it, because this is going to be super big in Windows Server 8. And they've got some new tools to do it with the ISE but you may wonder if you've been using PowerShell for other earlier versions of Windows, is it really adequate to do it? Because there were really only like 200 native commandlets, and they did a lot of things, but there were a lot of things it didn't do. And now, was it Jeff Snover that mentioned there were 2,300 native commandlets going on? So that gives you an idea of the scope of the expansion of PowerShell and its management domain.
I just literally walked away from playing with the Active Directory Administrative Center, ADAC, which is, we're all, the AD people are familiar with Active Directory users and computers, ADUC. Well, now you can pretty much say ADUC is dead, long live ADAC. And so in ADAC, they have a PowerShell history screen, window at the bottom. So as you execute commands in ADAC, it will literally show you what the commands were that were done in PowerShell, which really makes it much easier to learn how the thing works.
You could perform some activity, I'm sorry, and then,
No, go ahead.
and then it will generate the script for it, and that would allow you to then create a bash file that you could use to automate that process for more users or more PCs or whatever the task is.
One of the cool things you mentioned about that too was the word history, because it was a history. It wasn't just the commands from your last session, but all the things you've done in it for, I'm not sure the duration of the time is that they persist there, but it's quite some time.
Right.
So you get a lot of commands, so it really can help you learn PowerShell and see how it works there.
I think, some of the major, the major features that came out of this, for example, in virtualization, just astounding, and I'll let Mike talk about that. But it was taking all these very large new features in the OS, and then they put them all together to build these scenarios. James Neal called it, Bill Neal called it scenario-based engineering.
Right.
When I asked the question, how did you manage to cram all these features in an OS and have them all be interdependent? And we're in pre-beta, and they work. As far as we can see, most of them work.
That is true. I was amazed at the stability and the usefulness of the OS even at this early stage. Things were working.
Should we talk about some features, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe I can talk about storage a little bit. I mean, one of the new things they introduced was a concept of storage pooling. Everyone's got a variety of disks kind of all over the place. Storage pooling, you can kind of aggregate that storage into usable chunks and kind of manage it all from different locations. So it's really a nice way to abstract your storage, and it's another huge new feature in the OS. So.
Right. Yeah, and very easy to use. Yeah. What else?
One of the things that I thought was really interesting is they really tackled some of some features that have really bugged IT pros over the years, like, for example, check disk. When it comes across a corrupted volume, it can take forever to kind of go
Time
through
for
that.
lunch.
Exactly, and they've really changed check disk now. It's actually in 2 phases, where online it will actually scan for those corrupted sectors, and offline that's when it actually fixes those. So it cuts your time down enormously, to have those drives checked.
Yeah, they use some example. Because it doesn't depend, check disk no longer depends on the number of files on a volume. They showed, and then they demonstrated it. They had a volume with like 300 million files on it, and they said, well, obviously we can't demonstrate the old check disk on it because it took 270 minutes or something.
Yeah,
like
370 minutes, and they
370 minutes.
Yeah, and with the new version of check disk, it only takes 8 seconds to do the same thing.
It doesn't matter how big it is; it just took 8 seconds.
Yeah, they mentioned they split check disk into 2 parts, where there's now an online scanning part, and then there's the actual repair part that runs separately from it, and that's where they're getting the big performance benefits. What do you think about the deduplication?
Yeah, the deduplication about it, they really optimized it, so you also get lots of storage savings from that as well, and that's really impressive.
Yeah.
And really, we've all talked about this. It's almost like so many aspects of this server OS have been optimized in this release. I mean, it's not just one new feature or 2 new features, it's like everything.
You can see where that would have come from the cloud, right? Because when you talk about cloud-based storage, one of the big problems you have is that that's expensive, and it's hard to reach and all that stuff. Well, how can we fix this? Well, one of the ways we can do it is looking at all that data and saying, look, this is the same bit over and over again. Let's deduplicate that thing. But those savings also make sense on-prem as well.
Well, dedupe is something that, for the first time you hear the concept, it's what I call a BFO, a blinding flash of the obvious.
Yeah.
And again, the way they merge these features, and I can't remember, I think it was branch cache. And all these features, they say, okay, why not use dedupe, because we have it now. So they're all interrelated.
Yeah. It is amazing. To me, Jeff mentioned storage, but I think Hyper-V was really the biggest change. And was it Jeffrey Snover that mentioned that it was the third release and things that Microsoft finally gets
Oh,
things
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
But when they do get it right, you got to look out because they really do get it right. And I think with Hyper-V, that really does sum up the case. The changes with Hyper-V are monumental. They're huge. You can't say how big they are. Hyper-V is finally on par with what VMware offers.
Finally. And Mike, here's your $20.
Yeah. One of the previous complaints about Hyper-V was live migration. Live migration, while it was there and it was great to have it, it was limited to a single instance of live migration at one time. That's no longer the case. Hyper-V supports multiple live migrations, all happening concurrently. There was the lack of storage of live migration, there was no equivalent to VMware's vMotion, storage vMotion, but now there is. There's the ability to move the virtual machine files from storage location to storage location with no end user downtime. And then also you can move them multiple ones concurrently, so there's no limitations there. And so they're on par in that respect. And of course the speeds and feeds are totally on par. The clustering, I think the clustering now exceeds what VMware has. VMware clusters are at 32 nodes. Hyper-V was now at 63. Why 3, I don't know, but it was 63 with 4,000 different virtual machines in the cluster. Now that is really a step ahead. They've really leapfrogged in that area. But one of the coolest things that I saw was the ability, and this VMware has no equivalent to this right now, the ability to perform live migrations with no shared storage backend. In other words, you could perform a live migration from a host where the storage is running on direct access storage to another one with direct access storage. No backend, no shared storage backend at all. That was totally awesome. Completely help bring these availability features into the small business that can't afford these expensive SAN backends.
Oh yeah, I mean, and of course Jeffrey had his prop right there. Basically, we're talking 2 servers and a crossover cable, and you have live migration.
And none of the weird processor architecture limitations when they first started doing live migration, none of that stuff. There's the notion of duplicating a VM, which I didn't actually get to test in UI. They did it through the file system,
Yeah, I just
but
did it.
that has sort of a sysprep backend, so you can handle that kind of stuff. If you need another domain controller, you just want to copy one you already have, so you can clone it. Beautiful.
Yeah, you were talking about Hyper-V, and they have Hyper-V replica.
Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
you can take a VM, and I just went through the lab. It's click click, brain dead easy. Replicate it off to some geographically distant. No hardware requirements. Just if it can talk to it, you can send it over there. That would be a good kind of a lead into some of the Active Directory improvements. Because Active Directory is installed so much everywhere, it's really about making it easier for people than anything especially dramatic. For example, one of the big concerns right now is now that everything is going virtual, right now you can shoot yourself in the foot virtualizing Active Directory if you don't know how to pay attention to certain scenarios.
Right.
But what they've done in Windows Server 8 is they've made it bulletproof. Bulletproof virtualization of Active Directory, and to go with that, cloning of an Active Directory domain controller made safe and secure.
Right.
So it makes it very easy to deploy. They've completely reworked the DC promo process and the general upgrade process in general. The 80 prep process used to be, you got to be very careful that you did it at the right time
Yeah,
with the right
multi-steps,
controls in the right
right,
box,
right,
and you don't want to
exactly.
screw things up. You got to be very careful. And now they've just made it very easy and really nothing to worry about. So.
It was interesting to see also, on an entirely different topic, the influence of Metro on the design of Server Manager and how that's, the look and feel is going to be tweaked as well. So.
That's true. The Server Manager dashboard is way more usable now and definitely geared for multi-machine management.
Right. You almost wish they'd given it a different name. I mean, I'm not sure what else they, Servers Manager perhaps, or something.
Yeah.
But it's a different beast. It has the same name, but really, in addition to the multi-machine aspect of it, multi-simultaneous machine aspect, and literally the ability to batch processes across those machines. The look and feel is completely different.
One of the things we have to mention is dynamic access control, which is a next generation server file access control method that gives you far more flexibility than the existing users and groups scenario. It allows you to use, well, first off, it allows you to set a central file access control policy that will work throughout the entire domain. and a central auditing policy, and have that filtered down via group policy to all your file servers in the domain. And you can very finely control who has access to the files, both by this central policy and it uses claims, and it's also referred to internally as claims-based access control. They do this, and I just have to mention this because it's very cool.
Yeah.
They do this they actually shoehorn claims into a user's token via the Kerberos ticket, the pack fill of the Kerberos ticket. They manage to shoehorn claims in there and work it into the existing Active Directory infrastructure. So this is a very powerful feature, and it allows you to do things like what you would think of as ANDing of groups. If you're a member of this group and this group, then you have this. But it's done much more broadly than that. It actually takes attributes within Active Directory that allows you to find that this person, is a U.S. citizen and above 21 years of age, or whatever you have populated in there, and through clear expression, control it. On the file server end, it's tagging, where you can tag and classify data either automatically or manually. And we were watching demonstrations where something was tagged and dropped out of a file server account that didn't have access to it, and watched it literally disappear from view because they didn't have access to it.